if this is how the Panthers are going to operate, I quit. And I got up and walked out. Little did I know that you don't just quit the Panthers.
Sounds too easy.
And about a week later, they came after me.
All right, welcome everyone to the Water Tower Podcast. I am your host, Nick Milan. To my left is your co-host, Mr. Jay Yoder. Hey, Jay.
How's it going?
And we have a wonderful and very special guest this evening, Dr. Robert Oden, professor at Sac State University in the Political Science Department. And get this, former Black Panther member and, community activist and kind of does it all. And he was a former professor of mine over at Sac State, and we're glad to have you, Dr. Oden.
Thank you. My full name is Robert Stanley Oden. Everybody calls me Stan, so go with that.
All right. We'll go with that. So Dr. Oden is visiting us today, and this is going to be a great podcast. So tune in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification link, and check us out on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff, Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube where you're at now. Don't forget to subscribe, like I said. All right, we'll jump right into it. Dr. Oden, if you can just give us a brief description of who you are, what you do, and what you've been doing the last few years.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. I've been teaching for the past 20 years at Sacramento State University in the Political Science Department. So although I'm teaching in the Political Science Department, I am a sociologist. And I got my PhD at UC Santa Cruz back in 2000. And my focus has been social movements, political sociology, race and ethnic politics. I've been an activist most of my adult life. Even when I was in high school, I was an activist, but back in 1965. But I've been involved in Black student movement, helping to organize and run the Black Student Union at UC Davis in 1967, 68, 69. I was president of the Black Student Union when Dr. King was assassinated and helped lead that campus into changing their curriculum and their enrollment of students of color, particularly African Americans. And so we had to do a lot of organizing at UC Davis. Back in 1967, when I came on the campus, there was only about 40 African Americans on campus out of a campus population of 10,000. So it was really different atmosphere. But during that time period was the 60s. And so the civil rights movement had in the South had completed its course, but a new movement was evolving, and that was the Black Panther Party movement. They were really the first organization to really focus in on the disempowerment of Black people, on the fact that Black people live in a Black colony, and that they were being oppressed by the U.S. forces, which were racist and oppressive, and they focused in on police brutality. And they were really the first group to really do that. And I know that that's on the top of the agenda right now. But the Black Panther Party was doing this back in 1966 through the leadership of Dr. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, David Hilliard, Emory Douglas, a whole bunch of people, who were involved in a bunch of sisters, who were leading the charge on trying to empower the Black community. So I was involved with the Black Panther Party for a few months in 1968. That was a very pivotal year in this country's history. And I did this in Oakland, California, as well as up here in Sacramento and Davis. And I've been involved in the movement for social change. My hometown is San Diego. And San Diego is a community that has been, that's changed over the years. But back when I was growing up, it was a pretty racist community. white folks controlled it. It's a Navy town, and there's a black community there, brown community there. I grew up in what was called Logan Heights when I grew up, and changed to Barrio Logan as the Chicano community got larger in the community. But I worked in a federal program called the Model Cities Program when I graduated from college, and I worked in the community of Southeast San Diego, and I did important work trying to deal with the police, and I ended up doing an analysis of racial profiling. Southeast San Diego probably was the first analysis of racial profiling. It wasn't called racial profiling back then, but I was definitely analyzing the disproportionate arrest.
Were these your early college days, or was this high school?
This was after college. This was after I graduated college.
Okay.
And I got a job in this program called the Model Cities Program. So I was doing work in San Diego, dealing with the police department as a bureaucrat. I was working for the city of San Diego, and I ended up writing a program to try and bring more community control of the police. You couldn't call that community control in San Diego because they would freak out. You couldn't call it police review because they would freak out. So I called it community relations. And it was
Very
called
neutral.
it was called Police Community Relations Board. And so I've been dealing with police issues in the community, but you know, there's a wide range of issues in the community, not just police, education, health issues, housing. So I've been an activist around those issues. And then I went to I got a master's degree in community development, and then I went and got a job in Berkeley, California, and I worked in the city of Berkeley for about 15 years. I did a lot of community development work there. I also was an assistant to the city manager working on labor and management issues. I later had a chance to work in the police review process in Berkeley. They have a police review commission in Berkeley, which is probably the most progressive police review commission, one of the earliest. And I, as a former Black Panther, as a community activist, I was able to go into the police department and evaluate their complaints, citizen complaints. So I was able to really go into the police department and talk to sergeants and lieutenants and say, what's going on with these complaints, or what's going on with this issue or that. So it was quite interesting.
Was that in Oakland?
No, that was in Berkeley.
Berkeley, okay.
That was in Berkeley.
And was that, how did they receive that at that time?
Well, they received it all right because I was representing the city manager, and I knew a lot of these. These guys knew me. Berkeley was pretty unique because they had a lot of officers who were black, particularly the captains and things like that. So I kind of didn't run around with these people, but they knew me and I knew them. So they knew I was a pretty straight guy, that I would call a straight, and I did. But I always was always attentive to the complaints of citizens that went through the police review board.
Okay, and so what kind of complaints were you receiving then, and how do they relate to kind of what's going on now?
Well, fortunately, there wasn't anything as serious as a police killing of a citizen, but there was misconduct complaints. When people get arrested, things would happen. It's kind of hard for me to remember back then in terms of what some of the specific deals were, but basically looking at misconduct stuff. But the complaint would be lodged by a citizen. They had some place to go. There was a police review commission, which they had an investigator. They would compile the complaint. The investigator would go investigate it, go and interview police, interview whoever was a witness to the situation, and then they would write up a report. At the same time, the police department would do their own internal investigation. Now, we know internal investigations are usually skewed toward the police department because these guys are writing up stuff about their fellow officers.
Conflict of interest, right?
Conflict of interest, but this stuff happens every day. But in Berkeley, there was another set of information, another set of eyes that was used in evaluating police misconduct. So both of those reports came to me, and I would go through both of those reports, and then I would go and do my own evaluation, and then I would give a recommendation to the city manager in terms of what could be the remedies to the police misconduct or whatever.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing opportunity and an important responsibility. It sounds like, dang.
It was.
And so, what are some remedies, and did they get accomplished usually, or what was that kind of?
Well, again, we're talking about 30 some years ago. I don't remember the details of some of those cases, so I really can't give you the remedies.
Okay.
Now it's kind of so like you're working with the police force now. I think at the largest was there about 10,000 Black Panthers at one time.
Well, I would say between 5,000 and 10,000. There were people who were associated with the Black Panther Party who may not have been bona fide members, but there was over 35 chapters and branches nationally and some internationally.
You know what? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what Black Panthers actually started off to be, and from what I remember, it's community activism, community helping pregnant women. Actually, I think WIC, which is a program for pregnant women and women who just bear children, that was developed by the Black Panther Party, right?
I don't know if they developed that program, but what the Black Panther Party did, and the organization evolved. Because when they first began, when Huey and Bobby Seale and the brothers and sisters were out on the block, they were basically going and responding to police brutality complaints. And then within that framework, they would educate the people in the community around their rights. And then they basically said that they were there to help defend the community, and they were always armed. That's what made them different. They were armed.
And they knew the rights, right?
And they knew the rights, and Huey was in law school, and he carried around a logbook with him. And so the cops, of course, that became the main focus and the main, the main thing in terms of the cops saying these black guys are armed and we got to stop that. And that's where everything became focused on. Later on, the Black Panther Party start expanding their purview in terms of servicing the community, because they were always felt that there was a whole range of issues in the community that had to be dealt with. They had a 10-point platform, and only one of those platforms was about police brutality. The other ones were about health, employment, education. So they started developing programs that would complement those aspects. And one of the most famous programs was the Free Breakfast for Children program, which they instituted all across the United States. And that program became very, very useful for the party in terms of organizing, because you get the kids fed, then the parents will go, hey, yeah, my kid's being fed by these folks. They aren't as terrible as the police say they are or the government say they are. I'm J. Edgar Hoover called the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to national security. And these people see these folks feeding their kids who weren't getting fed before they went to school. They said, wait a minute now, these are some pretty down people. They're really helping the community. And so the Panthers, they did that in other areas. They created free health clinics. Now the WIC program, I think that came later on in terms of federal program, but surely the Black Panther Party inspired these federal programs, because the federal government wasn't doing much in terms of relating to the needs of the people. So they started health clinics, free health clinics. They focused in on sickle cell anemia testing, because black people were susceptible to sickle cell anemia. So they did, and the government was not doing that. So the Black Panther Party was the first organization of any type to even focus on sickle cell anemia. So they did free breakfast programs, health clinics, sickle cell anemia. Those three things are still going on today, funded by the government. Funded by the government. See, so the government appropriated the ideas of the Black Panther Party, but everybody wants to say Black Panther Party was this and was that, was a bunch of thugs or, no. They were revolutionaries. They were Marxists. They, Huey would call himself an intercommunalist, which is really a combination, or I would call a higher level of Marxism, because Huey Newton's ideology went beyond Marx and Lenin. And he talked about how people in the world, oppressed people in the world, need to come together and fight against international capitalism. And essentially, his revolutionary intercommunalism was really a higher level of Marxist-Leninism, which he really doesn't get credit for, because I think he was one of the heaviest thinkers of the 20th century.
How was his Marxism different than, say, how it typically was? If it was a higher level, what was the difference?
Well, see, number one, Marxism is based upon, the people, the proletariat, organizing the means of production, and you have different strata of society, bourgeoisie, the capitalists who were in control of the means of production. So Marxism was based upon these kind of categories and also how to understand capitalism. But Marx, even though he acknowledged slavery in the United States, he really didn't have any understanding of the black experience. It was really something that evolved particularly after slavery, but of course was connected to slavery. And so not only Newton, but other black thinkers, they gravitated toward Marxism, particularly after the 1919 Russian Revolution, during the Harlem Renaissance. Black folks were using the ideas of Marxism, but they were interpolating it in the way of how it deals with the conditions of the black community. And so Huey used Marxist-Leninism as well as Maoism, from the ideas of Mao Zedong in People's Republic of China, to basically evolve an ideology that fit the needs of the community. Number one, he felt the people need to control their destiny. So you got to get control of the means of production. Well, there's different ways as to how that can happen, but the Panthers knew that you just couldn't do that by saying it. You had to come up with some practical ways and examples, because we're talking about high level change, and it's very hard to say that in an abstract way. You have to put that into some kind of specific program, and that's what the Panthers are trying to do. But of course, when you do that, you're going to get opposition from the state, and that's what happened. They didn't allow them to operate above ground in a way that was sustainable.
Now, we're going back to Nick's question. Is like, we know how the media works back then, and obviously you're a more of an expert than me and Nick combined about Black Panthers. I'm just excited to talk to a Black Panther, or a former Black Panther. I'm excited that you decided to come here, and it's just amazing that I could talk to someone that's been there and experienced it. And then the news, from what I've read and heard, is that they target it as like white haters, and just try to dismantle it with Hoover at the FBI. And there was Fred Hampton from Chicago, right? He even went outside the black community to Latino and Asian, I think even some poor white communities, and did the same programs.
Absolutely.
And it still was ignored in the media.
Right.
Which is just insane.
Well, the Black Panthers in Oakland, they worked with white radicals. They worked with folks within the peace community. The Peace and Freedom Party was evolved in 1968. I was at the first convention in Richmond, California, and at that convention, the Peace and Freedom Party nominated Eldridge Cleaver for president, and Huey Newton for a position, and other. So in other words, there was a coalition between the white radical community and the Black Panther Party. So anyone who wants to talk about the Panthers not hating white folks, they don't, they're ignorant as usual, and they're just spewing misinformation. I know indubitably how the Black Panther Party worked with white folks. For example, my aunt, who was married to my uncle, my mother's brother, she was Jewish. She was, her name was Arlene Slaughter, and she was one of the most progressive, radical women in the history of the Bay Area. And she was a real estate broker. She was the real estate broker for the Panthers. She knew all the Panthers. And I mean, the leadership, her daughter ended up marrying Huey Newton.
Oh, wow.
So, Huey ended up being my cousin-in-law, until he passed away, until he was assassinated. But, so, yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to talk that stuff about the Black Panthers being not like white folks.
It's a headline, right? You read a headline, kind of type, and then it's even like when Beyonce a few years ago did the Super Bowl, and I think it was the anniversary of Black Panthers, and she had them dress up a certain way, and got so much flack for it. It was anti-white. It was all this. It was it's insane that continued. It was just a Super Bowl performance.
Well, and it's really the narrative that the white media and the white power structure wants to always keep out there, that there's always going to be a boogeyman in the Black community, right? There's always going to be a Black boogeyman out there, and we don't want to be touched with those people. But the people who work the hardest are the people who are on the ground, the people who see the needs of the people. And the Panthers were the closest that we could have found of a grassroots organization that was revolutionary. A lot of folks lost their lives. A lot of people are still suffering from being in jail, or some are still in jail. But I would say that the state did all it could to destroy the Black Panther Party. There were some things that happened internally with the party. Nothing's going to always happen righteous all the time with a new organization, but they were always under attack, so they always had to make adjustments all the time. But the thing is that they laid out a template for how to resist and how to fight against the power structure. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement, I've been a little skeptical of the Black Lives Matter movement, not for anything that they've been doing or anything, but I'm always comparing what happened back in the 60s and the 70s with what's going on now, and I go, well, there it is, they haven't really been the same as we did, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But the three sisters who formed the Black Lives Matter movement, which is really crucial right there, three sisters, that's a change. And so me as a brother, I got to understand that change. I got to relate to that change and say, okay, the Black Panther Party was Black male leadership. Black Lives Matter is Black female leadership. Okay, you got to deal with that. You got to honor that, and I do. The Black Panther Party was very visible. We had offices, the organization had offices around the country, and the cops attacked the offices. The cops attacked the houses where Black Panthers lived at. They knew. Now, I think again the Black Lives Matter movement has learned from that. They haven't put up any structures. Everything's on the internet. You can't attack the internet with guns. You can't arrest people on the internet. So I think that they've learned some from the lessons about not being so visible, also decentralizing the movement in terms of you got activists here in Sacramento, you got activists in Oakland, you got but you got different components of it. There's there's a lot of people who are associated with Black Lives Matter who are, you can't, there's no, it's like the Black Panther Party, there was no card you had, you got, it wasn't something you said, well, here, this proves I'm a Black Panther, or this proves I'm a Black Lives Matter. No, it's an organic thing. It's something that you go out there and do, and then people relate to the work that you do, whatever work is needed.
Yeah, it was actually one of my questions. I was curious how you guys stayed organized in the Black Panthers, how BLM uses social media. How was the organization back in the late 60s?
Well, it was tough. I mean, and let me just be real clear. I wasn't in long enough to be engaged with a lot of branch activities, chapter activities. So I can't give you some of the insights of how how people dealt with it. But my experiences were basically, of course, everybody just showed up. You communicated through orders, and you showed up, and then you did what you had to do. Unfortunately, there was a lot of police informants in the Black Panther Party, or there was a few enough. And it was really hard to weed out who was real and who wasn't real. So that was one of the major problems with the party was was doing that. So and also you had the FBI that was sending bogus information on the phone and through letters, and which people were attributing to other people, and so it was easy for the FBI to really use their counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, to usurp the communications of the party. I'm sure if the party had internet back then, it would be a lot different. But you had to do what you had to do with.
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned the internet part and relating it back to the BLM movement, because, and actually Jay mentioned social media, and I wanted to ask also, what difference do you think it would make in terms of, because I think we're living in a world of too much information now, so much that you can get lost on the internet.
Right.
You go online and you talk about police infiltration in a movement, and police would actually have to go into this movement to infiltrate the movement. FBI people have to physically go into these meetings to get communications, where now, they can just hack somebody's cell phone. They can hack material, and so it's a lot easier to get into and infiltrate a movement nowadays. So, I think there's a toss-up between, it's easier to mobilize, easier to communicate with your peers, but it's also easier to break down that movement. And so I think that plays a part in how hard it is to actually create and keep a movement going nowadays.
Well, yeah, I don't know shit about the internet, but
that's the title of this episode.
But the thing about it is, those who do know about it, they kind of have a way of using whatever mechanisms, Facebook, which I hate, is something that's used, but all these other platforms that people use. I don't know. I think that somebody's doing pretty good getting all these folks out every night for protests. I know it's slowed down a lot since the George Floyd state assassination. But people got out. People knew how to get out. People knew where stuff was. I'm sure the police are trying, or the state is trying to infiltrate with Black Lives Matter, but they always bring in agent provocateurs. I'm sure some of those fires that were burning were set by agent provocateurs. That's just how they do it.
Yeah, we actually discussed that in one of the last episodes. But there's video that they assume, and they kind of look them up, and it gets a little dicey. But what was got his name here? Curtis Austin did a TED Talk. He was a former Black Panther, and he got a random felony, I think in the early 2000s or towards 2008, I think, for writing a book about Black Panthers. And he was flying, and they called in the FBI to the airport. He had a bunch of books to sell, and this felony just randomly got on his record. And I think he was working for a school, and it caused problems. And he finally got it cleared. It took 2 years, but do you think the Black Panther movement is still sensitive with the FBI today?
Yes. I don't think they'll ever get over the Black Panther Party. Because Black Panther Party had really smart people, they were able to really connect with some really key elements in the community. But let me just be really honest here. I mean, it's not about the Black Panther Party anymore. It's about the young people who've been out there doing stuff. I mean, as far as the Black Panther Party is concerned, my cousin, who is a widow of Huey Newton, she runs the Huey Newton Foundation down in Oakland, and she's trying to get a statue put up in front of Alameda County Courthouse, kind of honoring the Black Panthers, which I think is be very appropriate. But that's about it. With the Panthers. So I think it's really what is happening with the young people, how they're doing things. And one of the things I think is really different, is that the Panthers, because of the need to arm themselves, it put it at a whole nother level, because we talked about revolution, we hooked up with other revolutionary organizations around the world, liberation fronts. The Panthers were leading the American Liberation Front. I mean, that was how we thought of it. And so when you have that kind of determination, that kind of focus, the state is going to come after you. I think that we were maybe a little naive thinking that we could take down the state because we saw other movements happening in other countries. But the Black Lives, within what I call now the social justice paradigm that we're in, armed violence isn't what's being talked about. We're talking about nonviolent, peaceful protest, using the power of the internet and the visibility of people in the streets, and then voting. Voting has to be the key component here. Back in the 60s, we didn't think about voting as being a key component. I shouldn't say that because the Panthers ran Bobby Seale for mayor, but it wasn't something that was a clear-cut necessity on a national level. Now that we have this maniac as president, and we got to get him out, right? We got to vote him out, right? We couldn't impeach him and get him removed because Republicans are all lapdogs for him. So we have to vote him out. Now, of course, he's going to try and do everything to stop the vote, but we're going to vote him out.
So what about leadership, Dr. Oden? We look at the Black Panther Party. They had great leadership in these social programs that they created, and you're talking about the social justice paradigm. And does the Black Lives Matter? I'm not sure how much you've been into it and researching it, but do they have the proper leadership, and are they laying out proper agenda plans and trying to set the stage for longevity, long-term change?
Well, it was interesting that you asked that, because I was looking at the website before I came over here. I said, I'll probably get a few questions about Black Lives Matter. Let me see if I can do some research here. They have to do better at, I think, bringing up the interconnections of the issues that are in our community. In other words, I know the focus has been on police, but they have to be just as focused on education.
Right.
They have to be as militant as they are around police violence, as they are against the education violence that's going on in our public schools with black and brown kids, and they have to help with the health situation, right? The fact that that COVID-19 has hit black and brown communities definitely very hard. They have to think about a strategy around that. Now, that might be asking a whole lot of these folks, but I think that, and then around voting, they have to be really concentrating on that. Then, of course, we have the whole economic development stuff, so they can't do everything. They can't do everything. But I think that if it's, the policing issue is a huge issue, because if you can't walk down the street, you can't do nothing. So you have to be conscious about how to deal with the police, and I applaud them big time for that focus, because the police should be working for the citizens, not the other way around. And Black lives are very key in all of that. And these white police officers who are running these police departments, they don't really have the same level of decency for Black lives that we do as Black people. So I think we have to always focus in on that.
You know what's interesting? I'm a detailer by trade. I detail automobiles for people, and I was at a client's house the other day over in West Sac, and he says, my son, he has two sons. He's an older Black gentleman, and he has two sons. And he says, my 22-year-old son, he went and bought a Range Rover. And he said, man, I said, well, what are you doing with the Range Rover? I thought you were going to go get a Honda. You want to go look at Hondas. You come back with this Range Rover. And I said, oh, man, I bet you he's got a big payment, and insurance is way high. And he said, yeah, all that, but a young Black kid in a Range Rover is already probable cause, and I fear for my son to get pulled over just because he's a young Black man in a nice car. And man, that really hit. I said, man, that's to even have to consider that is just fundamentally wrong, but it's something that has to be considered in this community.
Yeah, Black folks aren't supposed to be in those kind of cars, so you must have done it illegally. We are always suspect, maybe until you get the kind of hair I have on my head, you don't become as suspect, right? But when you're young, the cops are definitely going to stereotype you and going to ask questions, and you got to be prepared for that bullshit. Because it's going to happen. If you riding around in a nice swinging car, you gonna better be prepared. My scene is like, I don't want to be stopped by these guys, man. Because there's always a chance that some bullshit can happen. And I've been stopped, but not just randomly like that.
Tough.
Reminds me of that Jack Johnson story we talked about. Are you a boxing fan at all?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to change the subject.
No problem.
I said this once before, so sorry, people, for repeating, but the Jack Johnson story was wealth, dating white women back then, when first Black heavyweight champ, when he had to have a security force with him at the boxing matches and getting, very dangerous situation, but very bold man. And apparently his story is he got pulled over driving a very fancy car. It was a Black man. I think it was a convertible or something. A white cop pulled him over and gave him a little tough time and said, it's I forget the number, $10 a ticket, $25 a ticket, and said it's $25 ticket. And he pulled out a stack of cash, which I guess that cop's never seen a Black man with that stack back then. And he gave him $50, and he said, I said 25. He said, well, about a couple hours, I'll be speeding on my way home back this road, so there you go. I was like, man, I would love to meet that guy.
I love it.
Jack Johnson was a bad man.
Bad mofo. Oh, the stories you hear about him. But I don't know. Just to jump back, what was the process of joining the Black Panthers? How'd that go down?
Well, I'll tell you how simple it was. I was living in Oakland, the summer of 1968. I was living in North Oakland, and my cousin, I had a little cousin, who is now a captain in Las Vegas Police Department. But he said, "Hey, cousin Stan, you know, because he knew I was a pretty, I would say, militant and radical at that point in time in my life, and so he knew who I was, who I was by. He says, "Hey, I have a friend down the street, who's in the Panthers. You'd like to meet him?" So I said, "Sure," So I go down the street and meet this guy, who was a pretty incredible individual in terms of the Oakland street lore. His name was Lothario Lotho. He was an entertainer. Sure, he dealt drugs. He did this, but he was also in the Panthers. And so we were talking, over a couple of joints and stuff. We were just talking, and hanging, and we're talking about the Panthers. He says, "Yeah, you want to, see about the Panthers?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, okay." They meet down at St. Augustine's Church, which is in West Oakland. Tuesday and Thursday, they have what they call political education classes, and I'll take you down. I said, "Fine." So I go down to this church. I guess it's the basement. Yeah, the basement of the church, and the Panthers met there every Tuesday and Thursday nights. They had political education classes. About 20 folks were in there. And George Murray, the minister of education, who's a brother who I got to know pretty well. He was a professor at San Francisco State, and he was teaching political education about what was going on in the black community. He was talking Marxism, Maoism. We're reading out of the Red Book. And so, boom, you show up every Tuesday and Thursday. First the Panthers wanted you to get politically educated. Now, I was already in college, but shit, man, I learned more in those 2 hours than I ever learned at UC Davis. I mean, or anywhere. I mean, I learned everything about what was going on in terms of black community, black history, relationship of, revolutionary theory in relationship to what was going on in People's Republic of China or what was happening in other places. And so I religiously went there every Tuesday and Thursday. And then they would say, okay, well, on Saturday we're having more activities, drills and stuff, and I will come down on Saturdays, and the next thing I know, I'm being assigned to, to do certain things in the party, which basically was security. I never had a gun, but I was asked to do security at various rallies. We sell papers. But that was it. I mean, the story of how I left the party is a lot more interesting than how I got in. But that was it. Yeah.
Oh, hey, let's go there.
Yes, let's do it.
You know that story.
I've heard it.
Well, I was in the party for about 4 months. The summer of '68, which is a very heavy-duty summer. Of course, that was after Dr. King was assassinated and Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and everything else was going on in the streets and the peace movement and everything. Anyway, September rolls around, and I'm a student at UC Davis, so I got to go back to school. Plus, I was playing football. I was a starting wide receiver at UC Davis, so I had to go back to play football. So that was kind of weird. I'm in a party, I'm playing football, okay. But before I left Oakland, I asked George Murray, because I was president of the Black Student Union at Davis, and I asked George Murray, who was Minister of Education, if he could come up to Davis to speak. And he said, sure. And because he would have been the first Panther to come and speak at UC Davis. So I asked him how much would it cost. I knew it wasn't going to be a freebie. And he said $500. I could do it for $500. And I said, okay, $500 was a lot of bucks back in 1968, right? I didn't have $500. I said, okay, I'll just give it to you and you come up. No, I didn't have $500. So I was able to raise some money on campus. I got the ASI president to agree to give some money up, and he did. So I got George Murray to come up to UC Davis. Now, at the same time period, when I went back up to Sacramento, I was no longer affiliated with the Oakland, which was the central headquarters of the Panthers. And Sacramento had a branch of the Panthers. So I was not sort of, but I was now connected with the Sacramento chapter. But I was at UC Davis, which is about 20 miles away, and I wasn't as available for party activities as they would have liked for me to be available up in Sacramento. Because I was a student leader at Davis, but there were several Panthers on campus at Davis. So there was some people who really didn't like the fact that I wasn't, all in with the chapter in Sacramento, I guess, because I was at Davis doing stuff and it was hard to get up to Sacramento. But I had made this arrangement. And so the occasion, when the occasion happened, the Panthers in Sacramento, they provided the security for the event, which was natural. So George came to campus. I had everything set up, and he spoke. The Freeborn Hall was sold out, basically. It was packed. George gave a great speech. I think he inspired a lot of people that got to know what the Black Panther Party was about. The Panthers passed around buckets so people could donate money. I don't know how much money was collected. I'm sure several $100s was collected. And then the event ended. And I was so relieved, nothing happened, Panthers came to Davis, and the first event, nothing happened. So I was so relieved, and everything was cool. But about a week later, I got a phone call to come up to the Panther office in Oak Park. And there I met with the leadership there. And they demanded another $500 for George Murray's talk. And I said, there's no more money here. George, and I talked about it and got $500. He got the $500, and that's it. So, well, no, we need another $500. And I kept saying, I said, look, I can't raise another. I can't go back to these people and ask for $500, and I'm just as poor as you guys. I don't have $500. Well, we demanded, basically, and they were more or less threatening me to a certain degree. So, I said, if this is how the Panthers are going to operate, I quit. And I got up and walked out. Little did I know that you don't just quit the Panthers.
Sounds too easy.
And about a week later, they came after me. They came to my apartment. Fortunately, I wasn't there. My roommate was there. They roughed him up, trying to find out where I was. I got a phone call where I was, which was in our BSU office. I was told to get out of there now, they're after you, or something like that. And I got on my bike and got the hell out of there. And where did I go? I went to our BSU advisor's house. It was a black guy, black professor, Dr. Ed Turner, psychology. A crazy man, but he was crazy good. But he had guns. He had all kind of guns. So I went to his place.
Good choice.
And so I said, this is what's going on. The Panthers, they're after me. He said, don't worry, Stan. We'll take care of it. We'll deal with it. And so that week, we had heard that the Panthers were going to come down to get me, quote unquote, Friday night. So Ed organized some of the black students, and I couldn't ever thank the black students who supported me, my friends on campus who supported me, and we all one morning went out to the causeway and did target shooting. So there was women and guys, and we were trying to familiar ourselves with guns. My brother, who was a student at UC Berkeley, grad student at UC Berkeley, he was involved with the black student movement there. He came up with some guns to help protect me. And then we got in touch with some folks at UC Santa Barbara Black Student Union who were very, very militant folks, really down folks, and they said, well, look, we're going to come up to try and mediate between the Panthers and you, you know. I said, fine, come on up. And they came up from Santa Barbara with guns. So, but on a Friday night at the house of a good friend, we all were bivouacked waiting for the Panthers to come get me. And we hid behind hedges. I had an M1 carbine, and it was serious shit. The Davis cops stayed away because they knew what was happening, because we had a friend who was communicating with them, and they stayed away. Said, "No, you all got our guns, so we got it." So, fortunately, the Panthers never showed up that night. It was the longest night of my life, sure. And then the next day on campus, we were meeting, trying to figure out what we were going to do next and what was happening. And I found out that my friends who came up from UC Santa Barbara had got arrested and got their guns taken away. So I said, this shit is just getting out of hand. People are basically getting hurt because of me. So I decided, I heard there was a social event going on in Oak Park, so I decided to go up and turn myself in. I said, well, I don't want nobody else to get hurt. They want me. They'll have me. So I go up to the event, go up to the front yard, and everybody's out there, having a nice time. And so I go up to the head of the party, and I said, Charles, you want me? You got me. And he says, well, we've been told to leave you alone. I said, really? We were, basically the Central Committee, or somebody from the Central Committee in Oakland had said, no, leave Stan Oden alone. Now, what had happened, I never really got the full story, but I think my aunt intervened. And I guess she had heard about it or whatever, and the Panthers never showed up. If they would have showed up, it would have been one of the biggest news items of that whole time period. People shooting at each other. It never happened, and we kept it quiet. We didn't tell no news media. We didn't tell anybody about it. There was a little article, I think, in Newsweek magazine talking about something was going to happen to Davis and didn't happen. About a week or two later, a group from the Central Committee, an emissary, a small committee of guys, came up to Davis, wanted to meet with me. And so we met over my advisor's house, and they officially expelled me from the Black Panther Party. And I said, thank you. But it was like this. It was like they said, okay, look, you can't be in the party anymore. You can't say you're in the party anymore and all this and that. I said, fine. They said, but you can help support, if you want to keep supporting the party, you can do that. And I said, fine. Because I was 100% in with the party. I was never against the party. But what had happened was that the party expanded to all these chapters around the country. Central Committee could not control discipline within those chapters. And the discipline within those chapters against party members was kind of what they came up with. So they were trying to discipline me for some, what I call bullshit, wasn't anything that I did. It was something that they wanted, and since I wasn't going to kind of accede to it, they were going to punish me. Well, that's not no kind of discipline. That's not any kind of reasonable. But this was happening in different parts of the country. But I still supported the party. In fact, I became much more of an advocate for the party afterwards. I ended up having an article written into the Black Panther paper, 1972, an 8-page article written by me that was authorized by Huey Newton. Awesome. And then I've written other articles about the Panthers, and And of course, like I said, my cousin, Mary Huey.
Your aunt, she said, no, not my nephew.
So, I mean, she calls me up one night, I want to marry Huey. And I go, hey, do anything you want to do, baby. No, but no, she's a lovely woman. I love her dearly. She was a very courageous woman to, she loved Huey back in 1971. I knew it from that time period, how much she liked Huey. Even though he was married to somebody else, she was still in love with him, and they ended up getting married. So she was a very courageous individual. Frederica, her name is Frederica Newton Slaughter. And so, and I talk about the Panthers all the time. I extol what they were doing. And I was one of the lucky few to get out of it without having any damage or go to jail or anything like that.
What was going through your mind when you're about to turn yourself in? Going to Oak Park, I believe you said?
Yeah. I just didn't want, to have something blow up that would, make it worse for everybody, I don't know what I was thinking, man. Actually, but it turned out all right.
Were you surprised by the outcome, or were you like, that
I was surprised. I was surprised, but I was a pretty, been kind of hard to really get rid of me because a lot of people knew me, and I was a pretty visible person on campus.
And I would imagine you were pretty fast as a star receiver.
I was pretty fast. I mean, I wasn't fast as, some of these guys, but I was fast on Davis. I was the fastest guy on Davis. Come on now. There's only 2 black guys on Davis football team.
Hey, man.
And the other brother was Jerry DeLoach, who everybody knows here in Sacramento. He was an All-American, and he was my teammate. And Jerry could almost outrun me. So, I mean, he was just an amazing athlete.
Circling back to the social justice paradigm that you were talking about, and even when you mentioned political education classes being taught by the Panther Party, that just throws me back. It's amazing that opportunity was present to folks back then, and so automatically I started thinking, we probably need something like that, and there's some places here in Sacramento, I know Organized Sacramento is one of them, where they teach the community how to be active in their community and how to respond to certain things and injustices and things like that. And then I started thinking, well, that's kind of what you do, right? As a professor at Sac State, I mean, you have a classroom full of students, and how impactful do you think that has been over the course of your time there and really creating change in individuals' minds and students' minds?
I'm so glad you said that, because that's how I think about what I teach. I'm trying to politically educate students, and I'm doing it from a progressive framework. I'm doing it from a framework of the history of the struggle of people. And that was how I was taught in the Black Panther Party. I'm not as didactic as we were in the party, but I want people to do their own analysis. I want people to reflect upon what they're reading and what's being heard. I think it's really crucial for people to become politically educated. So to become politically educated, you got to understand the history,
right,
of what's going on. And most people do not know the history. And it's knowing the details of the history, knowing what was going on, why it was going on, who was doing it, and who benefited, and who didn't benefit. Right. And there's so many episodes within the history of this country that has to do with people of color that do not get talked about. But they're crucial elements to this whole trajectory of resistance and social change. And now we're in what I call a social justice paradigm, to where all these things have now come to fruition, to where now we're starting to discuss issues like reparation, which are very key and top on the list as far as I'm concerned in terms of when we talk about social justice. But also within all of this, and I wanted to mention this before I forget it, is that the term social justice is being appropriated by people now, right? People who don't have nothing to do with social justice, could care less about social justice, don't know what it means, don't know what the struggle's been. Now they're using social justice as a moniker. For example, the chancellor of the CSU system, there's ethnic studies. There was ethnic studies legislation to bring in ethnic studies, and now they're trying to co-opt it by calling it ethnic studies and social justice. I mean, they have no right to use that term. They're anti-social justice. They've been CSU system's been anti-social justice for the past years. We've been fighting hard as a union and as faculty and other people to bring social justice to to CSU system. Now they're willy-nilly using that term as if they can appropriate it. Well, we're not going to appropriate it.
So do you think, where do you think that would lead? And do you think it could lead to something beneficial? Do you think they can create maybe a social justice program to educate people on what social justice is? Or do you think it's kind of just fluff and it'll just kind of float around?
Well, you can't allow these administrators to define what social justice is. It's going to have to come from faculty who are on the ground who've been doing that work. For example, myself and other faculty, for example, Sac State, we created something I helped start something called the Center on Race, Immigration, and Social Justice. And that was 4 years ago when I started this idea. And myself and Dr. Manuel Barajas, who's in sociology, and then other faculty members are also involved in this. And we've been doing programs and been doing stuff to try and connect the community and academics around social justice and around issues in our community. We should be the one defining what social justice is, not no administrators, not the chancellor, not the president of CSU. He's trying to pull together some kind of anti-racism thing there at Sac State. And I told him straight out, we've been doing anti-racism. You should be coming to us, asking us our ideas about anti-racism. Oh no, but you can't do that, because you guys are black and you guys are brown and I'm white, Of course I know more than you guys know.
It seems logical to me.
That to me is the attitude that we're still dealing with.
Right. Well, that seems damn logical to me. Why wouldn't you approach the people that have been on the forefront all these years?
Because they can't control us. They can't control us. They can't control me as a faculty member, in terms of what I'm going to say. He has no idea how I teach my classes. He has no idea as to how I connect, the resistance movements that have been critical for social justice in this country, right?
And he's only been president a couple years, 3?
Oh, he's been there for 5 years.
Oh, 5 years, okay.
He's trying, but, I'm just saying, there has to be this is a social justice paradigm requires a different focus from bottom up, not top down. Anything that's done top down, no, it ain't social justice.
Yeah, I'd have to agree.
Is something similar going on in the UC system as well, or is it just the CSU particularly?
I can speak to the UC system. They have a whole different system there.
Okay.
But I agree. I mean, this grassroots movement is kind of the way it's supposed to go down. Jay and I, especially Jay, we're really into comedians, and we love Dave Chappelle. And we were talking on a podcast not too long ago about how he was saying that people were looking to get a response from him, and he couldn't understand why. He said, this is not our movement. This is not a celebrity movement. This is not a comedy movement. This is a movement of the people that are on the ground, and then they're doing a damn good job of hitting the streets and creating awareness. And so, I agree. It has to start from the bottom and hopefully get to the top. Right,
exactly. I mean, with these people, they want to appropriate. They want to kind of direct it. They want to slow this thing down, No. And see, a movement doesn't have a trail. You create the trail.
Right. It almost reminds me of Chaz. It almost seemed like that was... it's like the movement went there, and it just, they appropriated it somehow to try to create their own thing and create leadership and try to make their own thing. I don't know, maybe not.
I guess. I don't know. We were supposed to tomorrow go up there, but it looks like it's getting torn down.
Yeah, it looks like it's being dismantled. Are you familiar with Chaz?
No.
Seattle, they kind of took over the police department over in Seattle.
Yeah. You mean that occupied area?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good concept. I think people probably learned a lot up there. But I think what you have to do is that you got to politically control a community. You can't physically control a community until you politically control a community. See, and I mean by politically control, I'm talking about having people in government who are going to relate to your needs and your issues. The police precinct, should come down or should be transformed, but the people should do that. And so it's going to take that kind of effort. But the Paris Commune didn't stay up. So I mean, it's always going to be hard to fight against the state when you put up something that's kind of artificially temporary in a situation where the state has the power to eventually take you out.
Well, we were, after George Floyd was murdered, we had the discussion on the podcast about what is a solution with police. And this was before defund the police was catching on with popularity at that point. It probably was around, but not as much on the radar as it is now. But it was, we're suggesting, well, what happens is maybe, I don't know, just throwing out ideas, a black kid gets pulled over in his Range Rover or whatever it was, and a white cop pulls him over. Should there be an automatic procedure where another portion or another community or another police force or another minority relation separate from that police force must be on the location before any other procedure starts?
Well, I think we're talking about, how can you restructure the police department towards community control? And so I think what you have to do is that you got to change the frameworks that are out there. The police and police cars, heavily armed, and then that's how they roll. You got to change that. You got to get these cops out of those cars. And then you got to be able to have people walking in the community. But then you got to have people who are doing that walking be from the community. You need to have community, for better term, community liaison officers, people who are from the community who work in tandem with police officers. Now, you're going to have crazy stuff happening in communities, violence happens, so, you need to have some way of suppressing some of that. So, but you do it in a way that, number one, you're not going in using force as the first resort. Force is the last resort when people's lives are in danger. But you can't just willy-nilly say, okay, well, we're just going to come here with the force. So there has to be a reframing of what policing is and what it means to people, and how can you get community people involved with the decision-making that happens out there in the streets, right? There shouldn't be the kind of armed occupation that we have right now. That just and we cannot have these police officers who are working in our communities who don't know crap about the community.
Absolutely.
Don't know nothing about the history. Don't know nothing about the people. Get them out of there. If you don't want to know about the community, like, they should all take my course.
There you go.
They should all take my course. It should be a requirement. You got to take a course from Dr. Oden, for somebody talking about the politics of the underrepresented, so you can understand what the deal is. So you can start, connecting these dots.
What's the name of the course?
The politics of the underrepresented.
And I think that's so critical. It's so critical to understand the situation before you're going into it. And Jay and I have even talked on a podcast about the training of police force, and I think it was Andrew Yang who said that all police officers should have at least a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, so that way it's not only to be able to know when to use force and how to use it, but mentally how to just stay focused and keep your composure in a tense situation.
Right, but again, these people, they gotta dislodge these racists and white supremacists out of the police department. They got to get them out of there. I don't care if 90% of them leave. Good, we can find some more. People in the community. But we have gutless police leadership in this city and in most cities. Political leadership is very shaky. No one wants to talk about these things. They ought to go back to what the Panthers were talking about, community control of the police. But they're scared. They're gutless. And so we're going to continue having these problems as long as we have these racists running around in these police cars who, and I call them racist because they got to prove to me that they are not. They got to prove to me that they are not. You don't live in this community. You go back up to Antelope, you go back up to Roseville, you go back to Granite Bay, you go whatever. In your communities, you had no problems here. Your kids don't have no problems up in there. But you come down here and create mayhem in our community. You make everybody look suspicious. You make everybody kind of, I'm afraid because that cop's coming down the street. In our communities, we don't want you here if that's how you're going to roll here. Let the community take care of this if you can't do it, and you get out of here because you're racist and you are the enemy of the people with a police gun. And that's what a lot of these police officers are. They're the enemy of the people parading around as police officers. Because when shit gets tight, they pull their gun out and they're going to shoot and ask questions later.
You know what we mentioned a while back also, if you have 10 bad cops and 1,000 good cops, and the 1,000 good cops don't call out the bad things that the 10 bad cops do, you have 1,010 bad cops.
Absolutely. And this is the thing, like I said, internal investigation. These guys all know each other, and they all belong to the Police Officers Association, which is basically a closet Ku Klux Klan, clavern. I'm honest. Because they're just talking to themselves. And what the hell do they talk about? We don't know. But we know that black people come up dead or Chicano people come up dead, behind them doing stuff. And these officers' unions protect them. And they have what they call a police civil Bill of Rights. Hey, I thought we have a Bill of Rights called the Constitution. I think we ought to be working on that and making that better. Not these police Bill of Rights, which basically protects them, protects their methods, protects their practices, protects their ideologies, protects their political standing, because they contribute money to these politicians who become beholden to them. And police officer associations, they gotta, they have to be either eliminated or defunded or something, because they are the cause of the death of a lot of people of color, the Police Officers Union. Now, also let me say this, and this is not just hyperbole. You go down to City Hall and you ask the city clerk or treasurer, how much money has the city put out for police misconduct and police abuse? How much money have they put out? And you'll find out millions of dollars. Now, if that was done in the private sector, if an employees or a sector of your department, of your company was costing you millions of dollars, I think somebody would get fired.
Right.
You're costing me money, but no, because they got insurance and all this stuff, so they can, they can do the stuff as impunity. No, these people are making life miserable for people in this community. Now, I'm not saying that there's not some, maybe some good cops, But they got to prove themselves. Going through the academy and all that and getting your paycheck every week ain't not good enough, because when shit gets tight, just like what happened after Stephon Clark, what do? They started arresting folks for demonstrating on the streets, because the streets is up here in the fabulous 40s. Well, we're gonna arrest y'all up in here. What you all doing up in here? Come on now.
Right.
This ain't they streets, but this is the people's streets.
And they always some kind of temporary fix, right? I think 2014 they initiated the body cams, and we all know how that went, right? Body cams don't work coincidentally at times of importance, and so it's more systematic change, and I think it's that restructuring of the police department. And I think we've mentioned that on the podcast as well. It's not defunding, it's not eliminating unless it's absolutely necessary, because I think I agree, if it's necessary to eliminate all of them, damn, do it. But it's more of a restructure, and I even read some stuff about getting other programs involved. So if there's a 911 call, it's not only an officer that's coming to this home call, it's also a mental physician or doctor or someone that can de-escalate a situation so that violence is not always the go-to.
Or a group like the anti-police terror folks, who've been going to these incidences of police violence, and they working with the community trying to figure out what's going on. I think I got the name wrong. It's the anti-terror police project. They're in Oakland. They got a chapter up here in Sacramento. They've been the most dynamic group fighting against police violence. Those folks got to be connected into any kind of a policing system, so we can get some humanity out here in the streets.
Well, yeah, and kind of going back to what you're talking about, the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, or the country's Bill of Rights compared to the police Bill of Rights, is I was reading your portion of your book with Cornel West. Saw his name, had to read it because I think he's an amazing wordsmith. But he was talking about, I assume this is what the police say, and it is fix the black problem, where he's saying we gotta look at the flaws in the American system,
right? Not
just, it seems like and he was comparing what the liberals and the conservatives. The liberals want to, how do we fit black people into this society, and then the conservatives are like, you have to earn your right for us to put you in this American society. And he's like, it's always put on us, and then we need to look at what's wrong with American society, why we're treated the same.
Right. No, yeah, it's always backwards, right? The American system has never worked for everyone. So not quit trying to, but you can't fit people into that system. The system has to be changed so people can redefine what that system should look like, right? And that's what revolution is about. And people talk about revolution, or people mention the word revolution, people get all upset and stuff because they're thinking about bloody violence and things of that nature. Be quite honest, revolutions do have violence in it. But this country has the capacity, could have the capacity, to change without violence. And African Americans have been trying to, and people of color have been trying to frame that for white America, for capitalist America. And they're the ones who've been resistant. That's why we got Donald Trump, because we had a black president, and all of a sudden everybody freaked out. These white folks freaked out. Our country's turning over to all these black people and people of color. We can't have that. So then they run out of fascists. So hopefully the pendulum will swing back after we get this criminal out of office.
Oh, I'm glad. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have a pretty big election coming up pretty soon, and it's a big one indeed. And so there's some pretty high stakes here. And weighing the options, I don't know. What are you thinking, Dr. Oden?
Well, I think he's going to get his ass kicked. I think that if you look at all the polls right now, he's behind on every indicators. He doesn't have a program, doesn't have any ideas. He's killing people with his policies around COVID-19. The only way he can try and win is to suppress the vote, which these right-wing Republicans are trying to do all over the country. But because people know about that experience from 2016, I think that we have a lot of people who are aware of that and who are working hard on that. Stacey Abrams, Eric Holder, the Democratic Party, Biden's campaign. A lot of different elements are putting a lot of energy into making sure people have the right to vote. And once people have the right to vote, Trump's going to lose. He was going to lose very badly because I've seen I've followed politics since 1956. And I have never seen such a disastrous presidency with this guy. In terms of his campaign or in terms of his message, he has no message for the people of this country. Only message he has for the people of this country is that save me, save my butt, and that's not going to work for 2/3 of the people in this country. He'll get a third, but 2/3 of the people are going to reject him. So what I'm hoping is that we get the Republicans out of the Senate, that we get control of the Senate, state control of the House of Representatives. Joe Biden gets in, and there's some things can happen. But I think we have to be aware of Trump's treachery. The thing I fear is these right-wing fascist militia who are armed to the teeth. At some point in time, they're going to have to be dealt with in terms of their illegality, them using the Second Amendment as a way to try to intimidate and threaten people. So that's who I worry about more so than Trump at this point.
Maybe if I could wrap two questions in one here, but one, your thoughts on Joe Biden. Two, do you believe the Liberal Party is the party for the black vote, or do you believe it's the lesser evil at this point?
Well, number one, Joe Biden is the best that we can is the best we can get right now. He was able to win the Democratic nomination over 20-something people. It was just a matter of who was the right person at the right time. So I think that even though I am not, in agreement with some of his ideas in some ways, but I think that, it's not the lesser of two evils, because when you have something that's so evil as the Republican Party and so evil as Donald Trump, there's no lesser. Is this when there's bad and then there's better, and so we're going with the better. And what I am confident is that Joe Biden has good people behind him. It's not just Joe Biden. Joe Biden has now, he has the Obama people and other folks who want to put this country back in the right track and want to make it an inclusive society. So as long as we have the ability to beat Trump, which I think we do, and then drive these Republicans into oblivion like they are here in California, to where they have to, if there's going to be a two-party system in this country, well, they're going to have to reframe what they're going to do. But I think after this election, the Republican Party is going to break up in two. There'll be the Trump Party, then there'll be the Republican Party. Now, how they battle that out in terms of who ends up with the name is another story, but they're going to break up. There's no doubt about it.
And you don't think the left will break up as well?
No.
Oh, interesting.
We had opportunities to do that, but I think Trump has united everybody.
Okay.
Interesting.
Out of those 20 candidates, Democratic candidates, was there someone you were favoring?
I liked Elizabeth Warren. You know, she has a lot of energy. She has great ideas. She seems very genuine. I liked her better than I liked Bernie. The only reason why I liked her better than I liked Bernie was because I didn't think Bernie could get the nomination. I don't think he could have won. I don't think he could have beat Trump. That's all I care about.
Yeah. Man, I wanted to see him and Trump debate because I don't know. I thought he would be a good contestant. I just think this nation's not ready for that word, socialist. They freak out. But I don't know. I like Bernie. I liked Andrew Yang. I liked Warren gained my respect during the debates because she defended, I forget who, as a human. She kind of broke the political debate style and defended someone when it was popular to go after him. But
yeah. Well, see, the key thing is not getting the great, is getting it done. Mm-hmm. That's what has to happen now. After we get Biden in there, and then start seeing how people start doing things, and there's a lot of great people who who's going to be great in the future.
Cory Booker.
AOC, I think is going to be a great leader in the future. There's a lot of young people. At one point, I was after this last election, I basically gave up on the Democratic Party. I said, shit, man, we need a new third left party because how could you lose to Trump? Come on. I mean, you all need to be ashamed of yourselves. But the night of the election, the women came out and protested against Trump, and that really started to change the whole thing because there was resistance. There was understanding that we want better than that, So only the Democratic Party could do that right now.
Yeah, there's immediate resistance. And actually, now that I think back, when I had you on the radio show over at Sac State, it was, I think, days after the election. And we were kind of, you and I and Danny were all in shock. Like, damn, did that really just happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful.
Yeah, interesting. So what about, the future of what you think Sacramento needs? I see a lot about the police force and how it just really needs to be structured here. And I'm not from Sacramento. Actually, Jay's more recent than I am. Mm-hmm. So I don't know very much, but I see a lot of, especially on social media, about the police force needing major restructuring here in Sacramento. And even Steinberg, they're trying to get him to jump on with the people, but he's very resistant, it seems.
Yeah. Well, one thing is that the police department needs to be restructured, but under the present charter right now, it's very hard for that to happen. So Mayor Steinberg is going to try and push the strong mayor form of government.
Right, just in that.
I generally like Daryl. I think he's been a positive change. Even over Kevin. I think Kevin had a lot of issues, but I think that Daryl is going to have to spell out what is that going to mean. Because what happens when somebody becomes a strong mayor, I did this analysis in Oakland when Jerry Brown became strong mayor, is that these people stop listening to people. They stop listening to people. They become strong mayors, and I got the votes, and I got the veto power. Why do you listen to you for over there? See? And they only will listen to you when election time comes around.
Right.
So Daryl is going to have to show me how he's going to listen to the community as opposed to just listen to himself. Because if he's going to think that his ideas are the only ideas that work, and he's not going to be inclusive within the democratic process, then I don't want a strong mayor here. I want the city council to still have some power. But once he becomes a strong mayor, city council loses their power. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. We'll lose the city council. And so I don't want the city council to become feckless when that might be the only way a citizen can get their views into City Hall. If the mayor has all the power, then you got to go to the mayor. Everybody says, well, you got to go to the mayor. Well, everybody's going to the mayor.
Right.
Then the mayor sits up there and says, okay, I want to see you. No, I don't want to see you. He becomes a gatekeeper to the whole community. So I don't want that. And I would tell Daryl that. I would say, man, how are you going to be open to the community? You become a strong mayor. How are you going to ensure that people can get to you? What are you going to do around that? And he's going to have to come up with some concrete ideas. Now, in Oakland, a progressive became mayor, Ron Dellums. I wrote about his tenure. And he started off, and I knew Ron, followed him very closely, and people very close to him. He's passed away, but he's always been a hero of mine and other people in the Bay Area when he was congressman. And wanted him, and I worked on his campaign the last day of his campaign, but I worked on his campaign to help him become mayor. I wanted him to become mayor. And he started off, I would say, all right. He set up some task forces to deal with the issues in the community, and those task forces were going to help guide his mayorship, which I think is a good structure, because you got to involve people within the democratic process. But what happened is that he didn't do nothing with those recommendations. He did very little with his recommendations. He didn't involve the community. He stayed away from what was going on. Now, Daryl could adopt that kind of concept, that kind of structure, establish some citizen task forces on health, education, on youth development, on economic development, let people come back with ideas, you synthesize them, then we have workshops in the city council to talk about them. Make the people think that they have some input on their lives, not you just up here dictating.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so strong mayor, do you think there's any advantage to that? Like you just mentioned how he could create programs like that. Do you think that's an advantage to that strong mayor kind of rationale?
Well, if his head is on right, if he's thinking about inclusion, if he sets up his ideas around there, then yeah, because then that can revolve into other areas, the police department, having citizens engaged in how the police departments run, how the recreation programs are run, how, the streets are being cleaned, If he is able to develop a structure to where the people were empowered to make decisions in what's happening in the community, along with the city council and with the mayor, then I think you have something. But you don't want to have somebody who just has that power and then you can't get to them. That's what happened that's what's happened in Oakland under Jerry Brown, where people in the black community who elected him couldn't get to him after he got elected. I don't need to talk to you black ministers. I don't need to talk to you black businessmen. I don't need to, I'm mayor. I know best.
Right.
Well, yeah, it was kind of, there's this guy, Jocko, we talk about. He's a former Navy SEAL, trying to bring production back into America. But he talks about these groups and kind of going back to the police force and kind of what you guys are talking about with the mayor is like when something's not working how it should or how we believe it should as the people who voted them in. Typically with like Navy SEAL groups, it's always the leader's fault. It's whoever's on top's fault. So they remove him and then put someone in, and then they need to get everyone in line. If that doesn't work, they remove him. So do you think when certain things like this happen, there's got to be some type of law or rule where you can remove a mayor where the people could vote him out and get someone else in there?
Well, that's what elections are about.
Do you have to wait?
You have to wait. Yeah. He gets elected for 4 years. You got to wait to get him out.
That's the hard part, right? You get told something like Jerry Brown, and then he's in. Now, well, I guess we got to wait 4 years.
That's right.
Can we trust Mayor Steinberg, you think, to be inclusive and make those decisions? You know what? I remember when he first got elected, he created a joint council meeting. It was the county, the city council, and then the county council. And I think it was the first time that a mayor had done that in over 20 years. And I remember watching the live stream of that. It was pretty cool that they even live streamed that, and it seemed very interactive. They were talking about homelessness issues and violence and things like that. And it seemed like he was on the right track. And since then, I haven't followed him a lot, but I've seen that he's made some strides and he's really kind of focused on the homeless community. Not sure that he's done a lot. I think he's said more than he's done. But is he one that can make these changes, you think?
Daryl's a smart man. He has an enormous amount of experience at the state level and now at the local level. He's a Sacramento person. But you can't trust none of these people.
Yeah.
You got to make them accountable. You got to make them accountable. The only way you make them accountable is that you have accountability structures. This is not about you're a nice guy and we trust you. It's about what are you going to do and how are you going to do it and how are you going to involve us in it. And that's where the rubber meets the road for me.
Right. Well, and I think it's on us too, right? I mean, it's on the community to go out and vote. It's on the community to get out and be active. It's on the community to take these courses, these kind of political education courses, and not only in a Sac State or a collegiate setting, but community settings. I think, like I mentioned, Organized Sacramento is a organization where they're teaching community members how to be active. Mm-hmm. We should be doing more of this, I think, as a community, because that a lot of responsibility falls on us as well.
Yeah. One of the things which I lament in this, from my time period to now, is that back then we had study groups because we were just so in need of information and history. Because we had nobody, no black professors. I would know Stanley Oden at UC Santa Cruz or Davis or Sac State or any place like that. Very few black professors. And as well as Latino professors, this wasn't nobody doing this. So there were study groups. People would get together and buy books and read them and talk about them. That's how people learned about Marxism. That's how people learned about a lot of these issues. That needs to happen now. I mean, there needs to be study groups where people are picking up there's so much great literature out there. And there's so much history that has to be learned. But people are too much into the right now kind of framework. Mm-hmm. I want to know what's going on right now. Well, you better learn what happened back then so you don't end up repeating that stuff, So if people understand what's going on and read history, read some of the theory of what's happened in the world and what's going on. I mean, there's so many different philosophers and people who have contributed to how people think so people got to do that. And there's some young authors and young people who are doing writing right now who I think, are connecting the dots in a very, very analytical way. So I think that people got to appreciate who's doing the writing right now.
So is there anyone that you could recommend, any books that you think are because I agree, and Jay and I just had this conversation yesterday actually, is the only way to get fully educated and to understand something truly is not by watching TV and watching these suit and ties talk about it. It's getting into a book of someone that's been working in that field for years and years and years. And so is there any, off the top of your head, any literature that you can recommend?
Well, I just bought a book the other day. It's called Chokehold. It's by Paul Butler, who's a very esteemed attorney. He's on TV all the time. And he writes about chokeholds and how chokeholds have been used and how that whole idea of physicality against black people has been used to legitimize and enforce domination, right? So he goes through a whole analysis of that. So that looks like a good book to read. Boy, there's so many books out there. When I started thinking about it, it's kind of hard to think about which books. There's a book I just read this recently. It's about Hattiesburg, Mississippi, And Hattiesburg, Mississippi is a city in Mississippi, one of the largest cities in Mississippi. I'm interested in that city because that's where my mother's from. My mother's family's from Hattiesburg. But Hattiesburg, Mississippi, it was really a center point for white domination of black people in Mississippi and in the South, and really showed the structures of segregation and Jim Crowism on the, and violence and lynching on the ground level. I mean, this guy does an amazing story about it. His name is William Sturkey. And he wrote this great book about Hattiesburg, Mississippi, but it ties in how the political economy was made up in the South. You know, what industries were dominant and how did they use labor and how did they, and then how did black people survive? You know, what was the black social, how did the black community develop in the midst of white violence? I mean, you read a book like that, you go, wow, those folks in the South were very, very determined to keep black people in bondage, and so a book like that would just rock your soul in terms of knowing that these kind of people still exist in this country, right? Who we talk about the Confederacy and its Confederate statues, right? And in Mississippi, the county in which Hattiesburg is in is, is named after Forrest, who was a Confederate general or something, and then he ended up being one of the starters of the Ku Klux Klan. His name is the name of the county. The South is ingrained into the Confederacy. And so these are the kind of dominating imagery and symbols that we have to fight against on a constant basis.
Education is key. We gotta educate ourselves and brush up on this history, and I think on a grand scale. As cliche as it sounds, book clubs, right? I mean, sharing books and exchanging books and things like that, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think going back on like the Confederacy and the statues and stuff like that, I remember, was it 2015 when that was going on as well? There's a big media push showing that, and there's this young kid, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, I don't know, but he was dressed in his Confederate Civil War outfit, and he was saluting some statue of some Confederate general. I forget if it was Lee or who, and he was getting yelled at, and he was sitting there, and I thought, man, I just don't believe this kid cares. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like a line's been drawn. He chose to just be a battle on that side without ever understanding how that could be perceived from someone else's eyes. And I wonder with that going on now, like, because how I feel is, I don't care. Like, get them down. I don't know why they're there. I don't understand it. Throw in a museum. Do whatever you got to do. Like, it's. I don't know. I'm not from the South, but I just don't get how a black kid could go to a high school and they could be called the rebels, or they have to walk by the statue in City Hall, or here in Sacramento. I know Columbus just got taken down, and another statue also here by Sutter Health, and it's just, I don't get the big deal, and I wonder if people are just choosing because of media, because of politics. Again, I'm not from the South, to argue this point because it's something to argue.
Well, keeping statues?
Yeah, like with the people that are pro keeping statues.
Yeah, right. Well, these people are brainwashed. They're brainwashed into white supremacy. And so once you get brainwashed into white supremacy, it's very hard to dislodge that. And of course, unfortunately, white kids get brainwashed very early in their families. Anybody black or anything, that's not good. It's only white folks is good. And so the Confederacy backs that up. That's the only institutional framework they can turn back to that supports all of that. And it's just a horrible, debilitating, destructive ideology, white supremacy. So it has to be struck at all the time. Yeah, I mean, for example, like the statue of Christopher Columbus. Okay, I know Italian Americans, hey man, that's our guy. Okay, well, he's your guy, but did you know that Christopher Columbus was a slave trader? Is that your guy? A slave trader. He was I went to Ghana a couple years ago, and I was able to visit the slave dungeons there.
I went too. It's
You
an
did
amazing
too?
experience.
Yeah, well, did you go to Elmina?
I did.
Well, Christopher Columbus was there. So what's he doing hanging out there? Buying slaves. So, yeah, his statue should come down. We don't want to, he didn't discover crap.
Right.
And he went back and forth between Spain, Portugal, and Ghana several times. And the reason why you're going down there is to slave trades. Is to trade in slaves and black people, and to humiliate. But not only that, is to buy into the whole process of killing black people. As you went into that dungeon, you go into the room of no return because you're a rebellious African, and it is to keep you in that room until you die. And all the humiliations of the women getting raped, and Columbus was all that bullshit. Mm-hmm. So how in the hell could anybody celebrate that guy?
Yeah, it's weird that he didn't. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he discovered shit. There's people way before him that it was already discovered basically. But I do think it's funny that
he ran into.
yeah, and then he enslaved them.
He ran into it.
Yeah, and then my niece actually she told me, I learned about Christopher Columbus, and I said, well, do you know why Native Americans are called Indians? She goes, that's what Christopher Columbus called them. I go, yeah, but do you know why? And I don't know if I'm off here, but it's because he thought it was in India, correct? And
correct.
And it is. I was like, wow, they're still teaching that in school? Are you kidding me? At least our community, Lindsay. And I was like, are you kidding me? They're still teaching that? And she's like, yeah, I never heard of that. And I said, oh God, it's still going on.
The mythology of white supremacy is deep.
And in the miseducation, and you had mentioned that we need reform in education. So
absolutely.
So the Black Lives Matter movement is great and all, but hitting education, I think, is so crucial. I mean, the fact that teachers have to buy their own pencils and structure their own classrooms, and there's no teacher help, and there's a lot that goes into educating the future generations of our society, and we don't put in enough.
Well, let me tell you, like I was a few years back, I was on this panel, working group of people who approved the textbooks for the kids, and so it was a good opportunity. I said, yeah, this is very important. The textbook the kids read. Mm-hmm. So I had a chance to read through all these different history books and social science books from these different publishers, Pearson and all these different people, and then we had to go through. We had a big crate of books, and I was going through all this stuff, and then we had a meet, and then say what was right and what was wrong, what was left out. Very hard, it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to do, and it's the standard crap in the history books that they have in there. Try and insert, well, no, that wasn't right. It's very hard to say, well, Christopher Columbus, jerk him out of there. It's just very hard to do that. I mean, it should be done, but it has to be, it's a political issue. And when you get down to what's in the textbook and the people who are sitting around the room saying, well, that should be in there, very few people will say, get them out of there.
Right. Yeah, it seems like, wow, that's amazing, Dr. Oden, that you were part of that committee. It seems like that is a powerful position to be in, but did you feel powerless?
Sort of, because there's just so much, there's just so much, you have to develop consensus in those groups.
Right, like a jury.
You can't, you can't just say, well, my way or the highway, you can't do that. And so it is frustrating.
All right, I want to take a time out, Dr. Oden, and I want to see how you're doing on time. Do you have to get out of here at a certain time?
Yeah.
Okay, and if you need to use the restroom, there is a restroom here, just down the hallway here. But okay, well let's
wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to end on?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, we could talk all day long, but
It's been amazing, and it was a great conversation. I had a blast, and just learning from you, and I'm so excited you actually agreed to come here, and I appreciate it, especially under the circumstances. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Oden, Robert Stanley Oden, wonderful person, wonderful human being, and creating change every single semester at Sac State. So we appreciate you, Dr. Oden, on a grand scale and also on this micro scale coming on the Water Tower podcast.
And
so
thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. And for all you listeners, if you made it this far, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button and give us some comments. Let us know what you think. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Dr. Oden, Mr. Yoder. Episode 14 is a wrap. We'll see you all later.